I'm Olivia, 29 years old, and I live alone in a quiet little two-bedroom apartment in Seattle, Washington. I work remotely as a user interface designer for a startup based out of New York, which means I spend most of my time inside my apartment, working, cooking for one, playing lo-fi jazz, and watering the same 3 houseplants that I've managed to keep alive for the past 4 years. It's a life I chose, curated carefully and intentionally. I don't like mess, I don't like noise, and I definitely don't like uninvited guests. Some people thrive in chaos. I am not one of them. I wasn't always this way. I grew up in a bustling house in Portland with 2 loud, loving, over-the-top parents who hosted dinner parties on Tuesdays just because they felt like it, kept an open-door policy for anyone even remotely related to them, and treated our guest room as though it were a revolving door of distant cousins, old college friends, and people whose names I had to be reminded of after they left. Growing up, there was never quiet. There was never space. I shared a room with my younger brother until I was 16. I shared everything, my desk, my dresser, even my bath towel at times when guests overflowed into our rooms and used anything they could grab. So the moment I could afford to live on my own, I did. And I made a rule: my space is sacred. I don't have people over. I don't do spontaneous visits. I don't invite overnight guests unless there is an emergency, and even then, they sleep on a pull-out mattress that I sanitize before and after. That is not because I am cold. It's because I know what I need to function. And what I need is calm. My parents have never understood that. They've spent years pushing their worldview onto mine, telling me that I'm too closed off, too rigid, that life is meant to be shared and homes are meant to be lived in, loudly. Every time I video call them and they see the empty second bedroom in the background, they say something like, "What a waste of space," or "You should turn that into a guest room." Invite someone over. Host a book club. I tell them that room is my office, and they wave me off like I'm making excuses for my loneliness. They say things like, "No man wants to marry a woman who lives like a hermit." Or, "You're not getting any younger, live. How do you expect to meet someone if you don't open your door to the world?" I've learned to tune it out. Or, I thought I had. Because last month, my parents did something that I still cannot wrap my head around, no matter how many times I replay it in my mind. They decided, entirely on their own, to start telling people that my apartment was available. Not metaphorically. Not as a joke. Literally available. It started quietly. A subtle shift in the way they talked about things. My mom mentioned offhandedly that her old college friend Brenda was thinking of visiting Seattle, and I said, "Cool, there are a ton of hotels downtown." Mom just smiled and said, "Yeah, but she's trying to keep costs down, so I told her you have a comfy couch." I immediately shut that down. I told her I was not hosting anyone I didn't personally know. My mom brushed it off like I was being dramatic. But then, last Wednesday, it happened. It was about 2:15 in the afternoon. I had just wrapped up a UI mock-up presentation over Zoom, and I was still wearing my favorite fleece robe with a bowl of reheated lentil soup on my lap. The doorbell rang. Which, by the way, almost never happens. I live in a small complex with a gated entry, so most people call ahead or buzz in. I assumed it was a package. But when I opened the door, I saw a silver-haired couple standing there with 2 rolling suitcases and a homemade pie in a glass dish wrapped in foil. The woman beamed and said, "We're the Websters. Your mom said we could stay for the weekend while we visit the city." I blinked. They smiled. I blinked again. My brain short-circuited. It took me a full 5 seconds to even compute what they were saying. My mouth was frozen somewhere between polite confusion and primal panic. I looked down at the pie, then at their suitcases, then at the woman's face, earnest and pleasant and entirely certain that she belonged here. I said, as kindly and firmly as I could, that there must be some misunderstanding, that no one had mentioned anything to me. The woman's smile faltered only slightly. "Oh, your mom didn't call you? She said you were usually home and that you'd be fine with it." She genuinely believed that. She believed it because my parents made her believe it. I apologized profusely, told them I was not in a position to host anyone, that I was in the middle of work and had meetings scheduled and that, unfortunately, the space just wasn't available. The woman looked embarrassed, and the man, who had been mostly silent, gave a kind of gruff sigh like this wasn't the first time they'd been put in a weird spot by overconfident friends. They wheeled their suitcases back toward the curb without another word. I watched from the door, heart pounding, wondering how far this rabbit hole went. Was this a one-time thing? Or were there more people who had been told I ran some kind of free short-term lodging? I closed the door and immediately called my mom. She picked up cheerily, completely unaware of the tidal wave headed her way. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just asked her why strangers were arriving at my door expecting to stay with me. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she said, "Oh, was that the Websters? I told them you might be free. They're such sweet people. I figured you'd like them." Not maybe. Not could you ask Liv? Just, I figured you'd like them. She had no shame in it. No remorse. She acted like she had done me a favor by lining up company. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't a small error or a misunderstanding between family members. This was something bigger. Because if my mom had told one couple they could stay, who else had she offered my home to? Who else thought of my apartment as an open invitation? I hung up that call, stunned. My head was spinning. I started combing through old texts, old voicemails. And that's when I saw it, a message from one of my cousins from Arizona, saying, "Hey, Aunt Dana said I could stay at your place when I come up for Comic-Con in a few weeks. Hope that's still cool." It had been sent days ago. I never even saw it because it had gone to the message requests folder on Facebook. My stomach dropped. I called my brother. He confirmed that Mom had told him, jokingly, he thought, that she was opening up Olivia's place like an Airbnb for the family. I texted my aunt. She said Mom had mentioned Olivia's extra room being available whenever someone needed a place in Seattle. It wasn't one couple. It was a pattern. It was deliberate. It was coordinated. And worst of all, it was done without my knowledge or consent. That's when I realized this was not a one-time miscommunication. This was an ambush. After politely but firmly turning away the Websters, I stood in the center of my apartment in silence. The pie they had brought still sat on the counter, untouched and sweating under foil like it had just been caught doing something it wasn't supposed to. I didn't even know what to do with it. It felt radioactive. Like accepting it would somehow validate the ambush. I called my mom. And that call was the moment I realized just how far removed she and my dad were from any sense of boundaries. She answered with that upbeat tone she always had when she thought she was doing something charming, and when I told her what had just happened, she reacted like I had overcooked pasta, not like strangers had shown up expecting to live in my space. She said, "They're just a sweet couple. You have a whole extra room, what's the problem?" The problem, Mom, is everything about this. It wasn't just that they didn't ask. It wasn't just that they offered up my home like a roadside bed and breakfast. It was that when I explained how wrong it was, they acted like I was the one overreacting. Like I was the problem for not being more accommodating, more welcoming, more like them. 2 days later, I got my second guest. This time it was family, which, in a way, was worse. I had just finished a mid-morning workout and was halfway through a protein smoothie when someone buzzed from the front gate. I assumed it was an Amazon delivery. I hit the button to let them in without thinking, still sweaty and in leggings. A few moments later, there was a knock. Standing there was my cousin Becky. And her 5-year-old son, Milo. She had a huge duffel bag over one shoulder, a stuffed dinosaur clutched under her other arm, and that same overly confident look people get when they've been promised something by someone they trust. She smiled and said, "Your dad told me you'd love to see us." And I swear to you, my soul momentarily left my body. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't tell her to turn around and get back in the car. I simply stepped aside, let her in, and said, "Give me 10 minutes to get cleaned up." I locked myself in the bathroom, stared at myself in the mirror, and had a quiet conversation with the part of me that wanted to set the whole family chat on fire. I didn't owe them my home. I didn't owe them a place to stay. But if I didn't figure this out now, it was going to keep happening. That's when it hit me: if they wanted to treat my apartment like a hotel, then fine. I'd turn it into one. I pulled an all-nighter that night. Becky passed out early with Milo in the guest room after a long drive from Bend, Oregon. While they slept, I brewed coffee and went full design mode. I opened Photoshop, grabbed my camera, and staged my apartment like it was part of a real estate listing. I took wide-angled shots of the living room, making sure to fluff the pillows just right and capture the early morning light as it hit the rug. I snapped dramatic photos of the guest room, zooming in on the throw blanket like it was imported from the Alps. I even photographed the fridge and wrote out "Continental breakfast available upon approval," as if I ran a menu. Then came the piece de resistance, the website. I built a fake hotel page called Guest House, soft blue tones, flowery fonts, fake 5-star reviews written by names like Elise from Vermont and Gordon D. I wrote an about page with a painfully formal blurb about a curated boutique guest experience located in the heart of Seattle, offering serenity and self-discovery. I added a booking page, but instead of actual functionality, it led to a booking request form that required guests to submit their name, travel history, a reason for their visit, and 3 references. I listed absurd policies: a $250 refundable security deposit due upon arrival, a signed quiet hours contract, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. strictly enforced, and a clause about mandatory participation in spiritual detox and light meditation 4 stays longer than 2 nights. By the time Becky and Milo left, I was ready. I waited until Monday morning and then sent the link to every relative whose email I could find. I titled it, "For those planning a visit, please read." In the body of the email, I wrote, "Since my home has apparently become an open resort, here's the new formal policy to keep things organized. All reservations must be processed through this platform to ensure clarity, structure, and mutual respect. Walk-ins will be turned away. Namaste." I sat back and waited. It took 2 hours for the first response. It was my dad. He didn't find it funny. He said the whole thing was passive-aggressive, and that I was embarrassing the family by turning something so simple into a circus. I didn't even reply. I was too busy watching site traffic spike from Des Moines, Phoenix, and a mystery user in Florida. Then my mom chimed in. She said, "Olivia, this is ridiculous," and accused me of acting holier than thou when all they were trying to do was keep the family close. I replied with one line, "So is people showing up at my door like it's a motel?" That's when the silence began. No more calls. No more texts. No surprise visitors. The group chat where my parents usually dropped Facebook links and blurry dinner photos went cold. My brother told me they were processing things and that I should probably give it time. Honestly, it was the most peaceful week I'd had in months. They didn't speak to me for a few days after that. You'd think that would have been the end of it. You'd think sending out a satirical fake hotel website with absurd policies and spiritual detox disclaimers would have driven the point home. You'd think the silence that followed, 3 full days without a text or a guilt-laced phone call, meant they got it. That they understood. That they realized I wasn't playing hostess to their spontaneous, unauthorized family travel plans. But nope. A week later, on a Thursday morning, I got a call from the front desk of my apartment building. That alone was unusual. I've lived here 3 years and can count on one hand the number of times they've called me directly. My stomach dropped. I answered, expecting to hear something about a package delivery mix-up. Instead, the voice on the other end said, "Hi, Ms. Grant, there's a couple here trying to pick up a key. They say they're family guests. They have your parents' last name listed on their reservation." I didn't even feel anger in that moment. I felt a kind of cold, surgical clarity. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain and I could suddenly see 5 steps ahead in every direction. My parents hadn't just ignored the boundaries. they'd escalated. They had somehow convinced another couple, strangers to me, that there was a key waiting for them, as if this were a legitimate hotel operation. They hadn't even warned me. They had fully committed to the illusion that my apartment was some sort of free extended stay property, and they were the de facto reservation desk. I asked the front desk to tell the couple there had been a mistake and that the key was not available. I made a mental note to buy the staff a thank you gift basket later. Then I sat down with my laptop, took a long sip of coffee, and got to work. That night, I signed up for Airbnb. Not the fake one I'd built for the family. The real one. I created a legitimate host profile, uploaded the exact same flattering, sunlit photos of my apartment that I'd used in my joke website, but this time they weren't satire, they were selling points. I wrote a real description. I made it clear that the space was for respectful, low-key travelers only. I highlighted the quiet hours and made the security deposit very real. Within 48 hours, I had a booking. She was a travel nurse named Carmen, visiting from San Diego on a 4-week contract at a local hospital. Her profile was solid. Great reviews. Verified identity. She messaged me with specific questions about kitchen access and laundry availability. She was polite, straightforward, and clearly had no interest in small talk. It was a match made in heaven. When Carmen arrived, I explained the situation, not every last detail, but the gist of it. She laughed and said, "Girl, I'd do the same," and that was that. She unpacked, asked for the Wi-Fi password, and went to her room to decompress. The apartment felt calmer that night than it had in weeks. I felt like I'd taken back control. Then I went one step further. I printed out a sign, big, bold letters, laminated just to be petty, and taped it to the inside of my front door. It read, "Occupied, Airbnb guests inside. No unsolicited visits allowed." I posted a copy on the building's lobby bulletin board too, just beneath a flyer for a lost cat and a recipe exchange group. I wanted to make it clear that my home was now a professional space, not a family free-for-all. The message traveled fast. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. Then the storm hit. It started with a group text. My mom broke the silence with a single question, "Olivia, are you seriously letting strangers stay in your apartment?" I didn't respond right away. I waited a few hours. Let it simmer. She followed up with a longer message about how dangerous that was, how crazy it sounded, how I could be robbed or worse. My dad chimed in to say it was reckless and completely unnecessary. They were furious, but their fury didn't come from concern. It came from the fact that I had replaced their unofficial, unauthorized guest program with one that they couldn't control. Eventually, I replied. I kept it short. I wrote, "Yes. Because they book through a real system, not through you." 2 weeks after the Airbnb fiasco, after the laminated occupied, Airbnb guests inside sign had done its job, after the group chat went eerily quiet and my parents stopped trying to guilt me into submission, I got an invitation. A formal family dinner. The text came from my mom. It was worded just delicately enough to sound harmless, but I knew her too well. She said she wanted to talk things through, put this whole thing behind us, and have a nice evening with the family. The words were sugar-coated, but the intent was clear: damage control. I could practically smell the candles and overly prepared side dishes through the screen. Against my better judgment, I agreed. But I didn't go unarmed. For the next few days, I prepared like I was going to court. I gathered receipts, literal and metaphorical. Text messages where they had handed out my address like it was a public park, emails from relatives referencing "your mom said it'd be fine," timestamps, dates, even security call logs from my apartment building. I printed them all. I created a clean cover page with the title "Unauthorized Guest Incidents, Q1." It wasn't just petty. It was professional. When I arrived that evening, the signs were immediate. The driveway was packed. I parked 3 houses down and walked up in heels I didn't want to be wearing. My mom opened the door with that brittle smile she uses when she's pretending everything is perfect. The house was spotless. The kind of clean that means someone's about to be cornered. The table was set like it was Thanksgiving. Cloth napkins, multiple forks, crystal glasses, the whole performative effort. The dining room was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't seen in months. And there, seated comfortably like they belonged, were the Websters, the retired couple who had first shown up at my door with a pie and a reservation I never made. I could barely suppress a laugh. Of course they were here. Of course this was a stage. Everyone settled into their seats, wine glasses were lifted, and then my mother stood up. She cleared her throat like she was giving a toast at a wedding and said, "We're so glad Olivia is here tonight. We all know she's been going through something, and we just want her to feel included again." That was the line. That was the narrative. I wasn't setting boundaries. I wasn't standing up for my autonomy. No, I was going through something. A difficult phase. A moment of irrationality that they, as a gracious, tight-knit family, would gently support me through. I smiled. I stood up, reached into my tote bag, and said, "Thank you. Since this is a dinner about honesty and inclusion, I brought a few things." Then I walked around the table, placing stacks of printed documents in front of each person. Organized. Stapled. Labeled. The first few seconds were quiet. Some relatives flipped through the pages with confused expressions. Others went still as they scanned what they were looking at. There were messages from my mom saying things like, "Olivia has a guest room, she's always home anyway, and don't worry about asking, she won't mind." There were Facebook messages from distant relatives confirming that they were told by my parents to just go, she's usually there. I included a compiled list of every incident, 8 total, when someone had arrived, or attempted to arrive, uninvited. My dad tried to laugh it off. He made a weak comment about how detailed I was and said something about, "You should work for the FBI." I didn't flinch. I looked at him and said, "I'm not angry anymore. I just want the truth out. You used me. And that stops today." The silence was instant. Not awkward, gutted. And then, surprisingly, it broke. But not from my parents. It was Jake, my younger cousin. 24, quiet, recently graduated, and usually the type to stay out of family drama. He stood up and said, "Honestly, good for you." And just like that, the dominoes started falling. Another cousin admitted that she had been pressured to host some of the older relatives during a family wedding weekend, even though she lived in a studio apartment. Someone else mentioned being guilted into driving Uncle Ron to the airport at 5 a.m. because you're young and have energy. One by one, stories came out. Moments where my parents, or others, had pushed younger family members to give, host, accommodate, or bend, simply because they were seen as the most convenient option. What had been framed as a healing dinner turned into something else entirely, a quiet, collective exhale. For the first time in years, the family dynamic wasn't just whispered about after the fact. It was out in the open. No one yelled. No one flipped a table. But the power structure shifted. You could feel it. My parents said very little after that. My mom went pale, her wine untouched. My dad just stared at his plate like he'd forgotten how forks worked. The rest of the evening limped forward with small talk and early departures. Plates were cleared faster than usual. People left with hugs that felt less performative and more meaningful. The next few days were quiet again. But this time it wasn't the silence of defiance. It was the silence of understanding. Things had changed. Since that dinner, not a single person has shown up unannounced. No cousins with duffel bags. No retired couples with pies. No suspicious texts asking if I'll be around this weekend. The family group chat is quieter, but more respectful. And last week, for the first time ever, my mom sent me a message that said, "Would it be alright if I stopped by for tea this Saturday? Not I'll be in the area, coming by real quick, but a real, actual ask," and I said yes. Because now finally everyone understands that this is my home, not a hotel.